Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on the state of Coral Galen, apparently. And this is today's update. I know I already published one this morning, but that was supposed to be yesterday's, but I couldn't record it yesterday because my camera overheated. So this is today's one, and that's why I put on the appropriate shirt for today. Have a happy St. Vitus Day, everyone. Go have a doom dance later on. But until then, let's talk about chapters 3, 4, and 5 of Forge of Darkness. Alright? Cheers! Alright, so let's have a look at this. I continue to have a lot of fun with Forge of Darkness. I do like the more stately pace. I like a lot of the things that I guess I already said about the first two chapters. It feels slower but also less hectic, and those are two different things I feel. Because, you know, for example, the first half of Dust of Dreams feels pretty slow as well, but it's still hectic in a way that we have a lot of viewpoint changes all the time, stuff like that. No, this is focuses much more closely on the individual emotions and stuff like that of individual characters, and I really appreciate that, and it makes me really happy. But chapter 3 is not a happy chapter, because we're meeting Sanderlath through Corlad for the first time, and her son, Orphantal, whose father, well, let's get into that. So, Sanderlath has always been one of the one of the characters in the Malazan Book of the Fallen that I have had a lot of problems with, troubles with getting any kind of feel for, because it's difficult to have that character with whatever traumas she had in the past, and those traumas coming back to haunt her until she more or less goes completely mad without knowing any of that stuff. And reading about people with mental health problems is always rather painful, I guess, at least for me. It's always difficult to get into that kind of head, because it often is that idea that you see someone who clearly suffers and there is no obvious way to change that, because it's like someone with a physical illness or an injury or whatever. You're like, yeah, we can heal that or whatever. Or people suffering with problems that can be fixed, but with this kind of thing, it's very difficult to fix that kind of thing. Now with this chapter and the way it's built up, what I really appreciate about it is that while it's still, it gives so much more depth to Sanderlath, because we see her first, and that I feel is rather clever, that we first see her through her mother's eyes. Well, first we see Orphantal through his grandmother's eyes, and then we get a few reflections on that. And what we come to here, once again, is one of these things that we've learned a lot about. I guess also a theme that we see a lot of the Malazan Book of the Fallen already. The importance of a safe and nurturing childhood, and the influence that parents and family, but especially parents, mothers or fathers, have on their children, being something that is very, very important. The idea of the shadows of our past and of our parents is one that is very important and crops up in the Malazan Book of the Fallen a lot, and it crops up here as well, because we see that a lot of Sanderlath's traumata are actually inflicted by her mother, who, on the other hand, has also suffered a lot. I mean, I feel that whole theme, that whole scene reminds me a lot of your late 19th century or whatever novels, where you have these tragic declines of great houses. I don't want to say Fallen House of Usher because it's different, obviously, it's not a horror story here, but this idea of like the slow decline where people are clinging to illusions of grandeur, of former grandeur in their past, and what that kind of stifling atmosphere can do to people, to younger people born into that stifling world, that stifling atmosphere. And we see that obviously very much with Sanderlath being seen as not worthy, or yeah, as a failure by her mother, being told all of that. Her affair with that maybe soldier is just as much a result of that stifling atmosphere and the idea of breaking out of that. The idea of like a dream world being like of being unable to accept reality or wishing for something better than reality, because her mother is already living in what kind of dream world, whatever kind of dream world, right? And so that whole idea makes a lot of sense. We also learn that Centerleft obviously has a very vibrant imagination, no matter what. That doesn't help either. Now, what was really sad about it is when the viewpoint then shifts. I mean, it shifts first to Sanderlath, and then it shifts down to no other way around. It first shifts to Orthantal at that point, and we see like two interesting things there. Like, the first thing is Orphantal as a young kid, how he like makes sense of his grandfather's suicide, that idea of the knife following home from the war. I, I don't know how to say it. I just found that whole scene really, really that hit me hard. It's like you see first like his grandmother trying to make sense of the games he plays when he's always stabbed from behind. And then at some point you realize that it's basically him making sense of his grandfather's suicide, and quite rightly seeing the reason for that in like the trauma from the war, from his like war times. So that image of that knife following home from war. I guess what I'm trying to say here is that it is a powerful image, a powerful allegory, if you will, like a powerful image, a metaphor in a way. And the interesting thing there is that if you would describe, thoughts of suicide and war trauma, post-traumatic stress, PTSD, or whatever you want to call it, like all these traumata that people bring back from fighting a war, if you would describe those as a knife that follows them from the battle because they were meant to be slain on the battle by die in war, but they didn't, so they die later on, and it's like that knife following them from the battlefield. If you would use that in writing, in just an average story or whatever, it might feel a bit too obvious, a bit too heavy-handed as an image. But since it's a kid thinking that in that image, it becomes much more powerful because, yeah, it's a more childlike way of making sense of the world in this kind of image. So I really appreciate the way that was handled in that regard. What else? Um, yeah, her flight, or not really flight, but going there. But we like the whole depiction of how we see that house is basically fallen into ruin. Everyone knows it, but everyone is kind of playing along, laughing behind their backs. That whole thing, once again, I feel is interesting to look at when you compare this society, Taist society in Corel Galen, when you compare it to the kind of societies that are portrayed in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. This is much closer to like your feudal thing built on honor and mostly saving face and images and shit like that. Something that obviously still, we have in our own lives. We have people that, like persons that hold on to like personal like delusions of grandeur in a way, and everyone around them knows that they're no longer the most beautiful, strong, smart, or whatever person they've been a decade ago, or whatever. Um, but everyone kind of plays along and laughs behind their back. We have those people in everyday life, and seeing it just like symbolically like exemplified by that house and that family, and see what that kind of like pressure, that kind of these kind of wounds, like um what's the word that I'm looking for, promulgated, I guess, from one person to the next, given along from one generation to the next, how those damages will stay. That is brutal. I also wanted to have a quick look at the idea that Sanderlath is inventing these stories to give Orthendal a better childhood, where he doesn't have to deal with all these ideas of failure already, which I guess is a really good idea in general. I'm not sure how well it functioned, how well it actually worked, but that's, I guess, something that we'll see in the future. But the idea that for her, like, love to her son is that one thing where she thinks that she can do something right, um, and that's taken away from her, and to see what kind of damage that will leave with her is, yeah, it's brutal. On the other hand, all the I forgot his name already. Her lover, and Orphantal's father, the alcoholic. Once again, the Malazan Book of the Fall, or the Malazan world, or in general, Stephen Erickson's writing has is one of the few instances of fantasy, epic fantasy, that really deals a lot with addiction and alcoholism in particular. Obviously, there is probably biographical reasons for that, but I'm not here to go into details for that. But my point is, um, this idea of need on the one hand, of being able to only take and not push away, and then take too fast and too much, and yeah, that's pretty fucking brutal, is what it is. It's closer to the reality than I guess most people are comfortable with. But yeah, to see that guy and then see his perspective, which is kind of sordid, no doubt about that. But to still see his perspective as well as the grandmother's perspective, I found very helpful. I do pity the guy for what he, has become. Because, once again, there's always traumata behind everything. But yeah, it still leaves the fact that Sanderlath Drukorlat is a deeply damaged woman already at this point of the story. And it kind of helps understand her actions later on. So I'm glad I got to that point. That's pretty cool. What next? Um, Spinok Durav, I guess. We need to talk about him. Or not only about him. I mean, we know who he is. Apparently, everyone, everyone wants to bang Spinok Durav. Is something that I don't know who said on the Discord, and I'm like, yeah, I'm beginning to see that. But my point is, that whole scene. First of all, I love that whole idea. I love that whole scene of, not that whole idea of that acid, chaotic, or whatever you want to call it, ocean slowly eating away the edge of the world. That's cool world building right there, and I love that. Then also, I don't know, was that a Kachain Chamal that came out of the sea that kills the horse? I don't know. Sure looked like a headless Kachain Chamal, so I'm interested to see what that will be. Um, The like sexual attraction between, I keep forgetting, like the cousin and Spinach is interesting to look at. But more importantly, I found that scene later on when she goes out to find her captain. And once again, I'm so bad with names at this point, and figures out that maybe suicide or whatever you want to call it is maybe the only way out of her, like in this case not suicide but death in battle, is like the only way out of her predicament, that marriage that she's not really happy with, that apparently her prospective husband is also not too happy with, who knows. um, and that being a trait that comes up in Teist Andy again and again, I feel is an important thing to keep in mind, especially when you remember. I don't know if you have watched it, but watch Counselor of Moonspawn video on the how to say on the depiction of depression in the Teist Andy. So there's that. Another thing that I just popped into my mind. It's not exactly related to any of the chapters right now, but the fact that the father of Anomander Rake was called Nimander, and that's the name he gives his first son and chosen son, is kind of telling, because when you look at, I don't want to say it's snidely, but it feels like everyone in Malazan has daddy issues of a greater or lesser to a greater or lesser degree, or mommy issues depending on which one is the more dominant like parent, but still. But that once again plays into that whole idea that parentage, education, and just general like childhood is so important for the development of any kind of character in later life. So there is certainly a lot to that. All right, there's one other thing that I kind of forgot to talk about at the beginning of chapter 3. That is that child that girl being hostaged with the Yahud, being fashioned into a Mahib. And I love that depiction of the Jellic, or whatever they're called, the big jacks, basically, those wolf men. I love that whole idea of them being like that pack, and them not understanding the concept of hostage because they're like pack built society and so forth. Plus, also, obviously, Jagut. They're always cool. I just, love them. Especially when he's like, yeah, I'm going to use Omtos Felak now, and at least it will help me delouse the room that I make you fucking idiot. So yeah, that was interesting, and it will be interesting to see what happens to that person. Because, I don't know, I'm starting to have suspicions about her and her future. But who knows? We'll see. What else was interesting there? I mean, we still see like more of these intrigues. We see that idea that Osirk's father, whose name I will learn, I hope, is that there's people that want him to marry Mother Dark. One thing that I found very interesting is the fact that Mother Dark was a normal, average Teist woman that took on the title of Mother Dark, which is something that I didn't know before reading this book. So that makes the whole idea of becoming a god. Is she the first actual ascendant in that case? I don't know. Still, interesting things to ponder there. I'm, trying to sort through these ideas. But then let's have us a look at chapter 5. We come back to that idea of like elliptical storytelling within the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and generally what Stephen Erickson does, because part 1 ends with a chapter about Arathan and Draconis, just like it started with one of those. We have him riding forward. We see his tutor whose name I have forgotten, but I'm not sure if I'll have to remember it all by that. I always want to say Segunda, but I'm not sure if that's correct. So, well, yeah, me and brain, not friend. Um, See how he is very bitter and already abusing Earthan a lot. We also see how Draconis is completely unaware of this or just doesn't care. Um, Interesting things happen there. On the one side, we see that point where Erethan speaks up, not really speaks up, but makes that comment about weakness, and the tutor Segunda, I don't know, punches him in, and his warhorse is then almost killing the tutor, which he prevents and so forth. So we see that like bond, and there's a lot more on like the whole like horse rider, horse education thing in here that I found very, very well done and interesting and good. And there's a bunch of other things that I found fascinating about that chapter. So far, I feel that's sort of my favorite plot line in a way because it's rather straightforward. Um, Draconis is fascinating as a character. Erethan, maybe a bit too innocent and pushed down and whatnot. We'll see. But So there's like, as I said, there's two things I wanted to talk about. One, in the scene where he chooses to ride the gelding and then chooses to give the gelding water before the warhorse and share water with that one because it buried him, bore him. That's the word, not the other way around. Anyway, bore him over the day. So there's that, which shows us that Erethan has a innate sense of morality or of good and evil or correct behavior and is not yet too much bound by the constraints of ossified tradition. We also learned that tradition has very much ossified within Thai society, which fits very well with that whole idea of it being a feudal society with all the disadvantages and all the problems that feudal societies bring with itself. All these rules, all these privileges, and so forth. We see a lot of that here. It's like the idea is like, yeah, striking a lord's son is punishable by death. We have a lot of these hard rules. We also have that point where Draconis basically hires slash asks. I mean, obviously he only asks, but we kind of get told that this is something that happens a lot. But he asks Ferran to, basically do sexual education with Erethan in a very, very practical way. And we get a very, this is interesting. I feel it's like was the first explicit sex scene that I've seen Steven Erikson write. I mean, yes, there is one depiction of sex within Toll the Hounds at the beginning, that one that is can be seen as problematic, but even there we don't get details. We just get like the humorous commentary, and that's about it. But here we actually get an explicit description of the act, which was the first time I've seen Steven Erikson handle it. I felt it was well done. It was like done in a respectful, almost tender way, which fits the topic and the situation with him being this being his first time and so forth. And there's a one thing that I really feel makes it important is that scene, that idea of her teaching him, teaching him that it is about satisfaction, and that goes both ways. It's not just like the man comes and that's it. No, it's about making both parties happy and satisfied, and she teaches him that. And I felt that was an interesting, not an interesting, but well done, and shows once again this idea that a lot of these writings in the Malazan universe are very much about like breaking with gender stereotypes in a way, or not only that, but um, making clear that gender stereotypes and gender roles are oftentimes problematic. The other thing, however, is that Draconis as a lord just can potentially ask higher force or command underlings to do that. He has almost, yeah, he has power over their bodies, which is much closer to what you see in like a medieval, or not medieval, but in a feudalist society. So I felt that reinforced that point a lot. All right. What else? Well, Draconis has certainly started to, you know, realize that his son is not as useless or as worthless or as dumb as he thought. Um, we'll see where all of that goes. We have that cool meeting with, I already forgot his name, the Hathelakai Asathanai guy who just makes everyone drunk. I like him already. On site, he seems cool. I hope he stays cool. We'll see. But yeah, I don't know. It will be interesting to see where all of that goes in the next part. I feel I've rambled enough for today. I'll talk to you tomorrow about the beginnings of part two of Forge of Darkness. Can't wait for it, actually. So until then, happy St. Vitus and cheers.